This is a video on naming compounds for Year 9 Science as part of the Chemical World topic. A lot of students struggle with this idea of how to name compounds. So suppose I give you the following compound. Now there's two things you can do here. Your first option is to panic, and that leads to bombing out in the exam. Or number two, you can follow my steps. I think number two sounds good. Okay, let's do this step by step. The first thing to do is to identify. What does that mean? Okay, typically questions like this will involve either covalent or ionic compounds. So your first step is to identify, is to ask yourself, is this ionic or is this covalent? Now in this case, if you look here, BaCl2, to work this out, you need the periodic table. You don't need to memorize these names, these elements, okay? This is a compound because it's made of two or more different elements. The periodic table. Now in this case, Ba on the periodic table is barium, and Cl is chlorine. So this is clearly an ionic compound because it's got a metal and a non-metal. When you have a metal atom and a non-metal atom stuck together, or in this case ions, you get an ionic compound. So we've recognized that this is an ionic compound. Now with step 3, with ionic compounds, no prefixes are needed. And you always have an IDE ending, ide. Now in this case it would be barium. So you write the name of the first element, which is barium, Ba, not chlorine, but chloride. You replace the INE with IDE. And that is how you name it. So identify, ask yourself if it's ionic or covalent, then use the periodic table to work out the names. And then number 3 is to use the fact that for ionic compounds, for naming ionic compounds, you don't need any prefixes, any words at the front. So let's say dichloride, cis-chloride, and there you have it. That's the actual name of the compound. Let's do another one. Let's do H2O2. Okay, once again, I'm not going to write the steps again. So I'm going to go through them briefly. Step 1 is to identify, is this covalent or ionic? And the way you do that is by using the periodic table. So H is hydrogen and O is oxygen. Step 3. So we've established that it's, before step 3, hydrogen and oxygen, these are both non-metals. So two non-metal atoms stuck together gives you a covalent compound. H2O2 is a covalent compound. With covalent compounds, for step 3, you need prefixes. What are the prefixes? Okay, for the exam, the yearly exam, going from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 8 is sufficient. So the prefix for 1 is mono. Think of a monobrow. There's nothing wrong with monobrows, by the way. Number 2, di. Think of dice. Okay. A die is 1. It's singular. Dice is 2. It's plural for die. Tri is 3. Think of a triangle. It's got 3 sides. And then tetra is 4. Just think of Tetris, the game. Think of a rectangle. 5 is penta. Think of a pentagon. 6 is hexa. Think of a hexagon. I'm not going to draw it. 7 is hepta. And 8 is octa. Think of an octagon. So from 5 to 8, just think of polygons like a pentagon, hexagon, heptagon, octagon. So these are the prefixes. Now in this case, there's two of each. There's two hydrogen atoms and there's two oxygen atoms. So we can now name it as follows: hydrogen. Now, as is the case with ionic compounds, it's not oxygen, but it's oxide. So you replace the YGEN with IDE, and now you put the prefix at the front, so it's dihydrogen dioxide, and that's your compound. So this is two words here: dihydrogen dioxide. Let's do another one. Let's do this. Okay, so step one is to identify if it's ionic or covalent. And the way we do this is we go to the periodic table. K is potassium and P is phosphorus. On the periodic table, potassium is a metal M, phosphorus is a non-metal M. So potassium is on the left of the periodic table. That's where the metals tend to be. And phosphorus is on the right. That's where the non-metals tend to be. So a metal and a non-metal, that gives you an ion. It's an ionic compound. So let's write down potassium. Now with ionic compounds, you don't need any prefixes. And you have to end it with "ide," if you remember. So it's potassium. You don't need to worry about the three, the tri. Potassium, not phosphorus, but phosphide, IDE. Let's do another one. Okay, this one looks complicated. Let's break it down. Now the hint here is look at these brackets here around the SO4. Step one, identify if it's ionic or covalent. Step two, periodic table. Now the Fe, that's iron. Now the SO4, if you recall, hopefully, SO4, this is a polyatomic ion. Poly means many, atomic made of atoms. So this here is an ion. It's made of more than two, it's made of two or more different types of atoms. Now sulfur is S, oxygen is O, SO4, the SO4, that's a non-metal, and the iron, that's a metal. So this is ionic. It's an ionic compound. The SO4 has a name. Actually, so to get this formula, if you recall, you had to crisscross. So initially you would have this SO4 2 minus. This is the polyatomic ion. It's called sulfate. And Fe is iron. It would have a charge of +3. Now, metals tend to have tend to form ions that are positively charged. Okay, iron +3. So it loses 3 electrons to become positive. The sulfate is negatively charged. So when you combine these, the 2 comes down here, and the SO4, the 3 comes down here. You crisscross. So that's why the SO4 has a charge of -2. And the compound is called, so Fe is iron sulfate. You have to be careful, they might trick you in the exam. The brackets hopefully will help, and hopefully recognize that that's the sulfate, polyatomic ion. Let's do another one last one. Okay, step one, ionic or covalent. Step two, let's work it out using the periodic table. Ca, from left to right, Ca is calcium, and that's a metal. That's in group 2 on the left of the periodic table. And NO3, so the brackets to help you out, NO3, that's the nitrate ion, polyatomic ion. And nitrate has a charge of -. So minus for nitrate, calcium would have to be plus, right? +2 in this case. It's in group 2, it's a metal. And if you recall, to get CaNO3 too, it's this. When you stick them together, the 2 comes down and the -1 stays as it is. So this is called calcium nitrate. And that's how you name compounds.